just about sailing, June 2020. This one is all about woodworking, and in particular me overcoming my fear, that's probably not too strong a word, of woodwork. I never really felt comfortable with woodwork, and like most things which we don't feel comfortable with, we avoid them. I know a lot of people have watched things on this channel where I've done some really quite dramatic fiberglass work, and people say, oh, I wouldn't want to do that. I feel very comfortable with fiberglass work, but I've done a lot of it starting a few years ago. I've never felt comfortable with woodwork. This is my most challenging project that I did to date, and that's a simple cover that I made to put over the hatch. I had a great woodworking teacher at school, so I don't know where this has come from, but I've never felt good, never felt comfortable with it. So this one is not about doing anything on Serenity. Myself and Lucy have been doing some varnishing work, doing some scraping, doing some other bits and pieces, and that will come in the next video. This is about making a new bridge for this thing, this double base. Regular viewers will know that I like bases. I've always wanted a double base. I've got an electric upright base which will fit on the boat and I can play on the boat. But the opportunity to buy this came up during lockdown, and I was allowed to go and pick it up. The problem is the bridge was broken, that's this bit. And either I needed to wait for the local luthier, who's away until August and is probably going to have a list as long as your arm to do things, or I had to do it myself, so I decided to do it myself. The reason I wanted this comes from a place called Reagan in Transylvania, if you look at the top middle of this map. Bottom left hand side is Turnerven, and I lived there for 8 months while I was working as a volunteer in a psychiatric hospital. I love this part of the world, and so this is slightly sentimental. This was made in about mid-70s, so it's about the same age as Serenity, and it is in fabulous condition. You get a lot of these things, and usually they're in awful condition. They've been played to death. This one is in fabulous condition, so I couldn't resist it, even with the broken bridge, which I knew I would have to fix. The top is Carpathian spruce, so it's about as good as it can get. The back and the sides are laminated, and it's kind of made in a factory because it's really made during the Ceausescu era, and these things were just chucked out. So it's not the best base in the world. There are a few issues, but it's the one I wanted. Anyway, this is a long video, but you certainly don't have to watch all of it or any of it, so turn off now if you're not interested in seeing any of this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look at a bit of theory in terms of what you have to do, because I've made, I had to make a few of these, and some of them didn't work and some of them did, and lots of pieces of paper, and it's not as easy. Well, anyway, so I'm going to go through a bit of the theory, and then I'm going to do the before, what the problems were. I'm going to go straight into the after, what the new bridge looks like, and then I'm going to do a sound comparison before and after. And I am only just starting to learn how to play this beast, so I'm using a few tunes I'm doing an online course with Discover Double Bass, the beginner's double bass course. I'll put a link to their YouTube channel below, and I thoroughly recommend that if you want something to do during lockdown and surprise your other half, buy yourself a double bass, just move it into the house and start doing some lessons. So I'm going to do the before and after bit, and then after that there's a whole section which is how I actually did it, and I'm going to go into doing the bridge and also moving the sound post. Anyway, we'll talk about all of that. So you can either watch none of it, some of it, or all of it, and I'll see you in the next video if you decide to tune out now with some actual boat stuff. Okie doke, let's get on and do a little bit of the theory. Right, so here's the sort of theory bit. If you think these are the two worst pictures of double basses you've ever seen, you wait till you see the next picture. So basically this is the double bass laying on its side. This top bit is called the table. This is the string, and you can see that there's this is called the mensur, or the playing length, and this is the after length. The angle here is very different from this bit to this bit, a little bit like the rigging in a boat. And the deal is that the bridge is supposed to be so that it sort of intersects this here, so that there's an equal angle on either side. Now this isn't going to look accurate, but I will try and draw it. That's roughly about the centre. Yep, so it divides that angle by 2. And then what you have, so that the bridge will actually stand up, is this bit here. I've drawn that awfully. That should be at 90 degrees. Does that make sense? On my base, when I got it. It was exactly the other way around. That was actually slightly curved, so I think it's probably warped. And it was that way around. So it was completely wrong. So that's just to denote a 90-degree angle. So that's what I need to do to make that, the geometry of that work. The other thing is there's something called a sound post. Where's another piece of paper? Here's another brilliant drawing. This is the double bass from the top. Underneath the bass side, this is the E string, there is stuck inside the bass to the table from the inside is what's called a bass bar. It's a piece of wood about an inch wide or less than that, and a little bit and carved, and it sort of goes underneath one of the feet of the bridges. That's that. Now if you imagine, there isn't one, but if you imagine there was a bass bar exactly in the same place on this side, the sound post should be about there with the edge of the sound post on where the edge of the bass bar would be, and the distance between the sound post and there should be equal to the thickness of the wood at that point, right? Actually, let me draw that on the other one. So it would be about there, standing up inside the bass. Yeah, it's made out of maple, that's made out of maple. This top on my bass is Carpathian spruce. The sides are maple, actually. I think they're maple. This is supposed to be ebony, I don't think it is, and there's a piece of wood up here which is supposed to be ebony, and I think mine might be. You can, on the internet, there's loads of stuff. You can get rough dimensions and so on for bridges and things, but it's a question of making it all work somehow. And anyway, so that's as much theory as I'm going to... Oh, the other thing is, this distance here, this is key. I sometimes call this the action, but it's really the string height. And if that's too high, it's difficult to play. Equally importantly is the string height here at what's called the nut. Now what I did, it's not included in this video, but I've put a link to another video below where I did actually adjust the nut height and reduced it. And the reason I put that in a video below is because legally you're not allowed to do that. I would literally never be allowed into anywhere. But double bass players, it's, you know, people who've been to Hogwarts are allowed to do this, but it's actually quite an easy job. But I put it hidden in one of those hidden videos simply so that nobody could ever see that I'd actually done that. So there's a little 12-minute video below on that if you want to know how to do that. There we go, so that's what we need to do. Let's now have a look at a bit of a before and after to see whether I managed to do anything like that and see if it made a difference in the sound. Right, so the main thing is there's a crack all the way through, right across there. The strings are literally buried into the bridge, and secondly you can see that here. This string, the covering is completely cut off on the A string. It's not brilliant on the E string. It's kind of okay on the other two, but as I say, these strings are just literally buried, and there's a very variable width in terms of the bridge throughout the top. Difficult to see, but the bridge is on actually back to front. This is at 90 degrees and this is sloping, meaning that the angle this intersects the strings is completely wrong. I've used a China graph pencil. That should intersect in the middle of the bridge. The bridge is in the wrong place. If you can see that again, China graph very roughly, and this should be bigger. That's where the sound post actually is. In fact, it goes underneath the bridge a bit, and that's where it should be. So it's completely in the wrong place. And I don't know if I can get down this low. Right, so this is underneath the bass. This is the tail gut here. This has obviously been pushed all the way to this side. This length is right on the edge, and in fact just falling off the edge where there's a bit of a slope. Difficult to see, I can't see it properly. I think these are in okay condition, but I might as well replace those while I'm at it. And move this up a bit. I'm sure it shouldn't be poking down below there. It's not quite touching, but it's very close. Oh, actually, there you can see it's actually on the slopey bit there. So, do I take this off and try and modify it, glue that up, perhaps switch it round, or do I cut a new one out of this? I really do. This is a very cheap one. It's £27. Or do I try and make something new out of this? I don't know. I think what I need to do is both actually and see what works and see whether this is a temporary fix or if I do actually have the skills to do this, which there's an awful lot of work that needs doing on these blank things. I don't know if I really don't know if I have the skills or not. I don't know if I have the tools, let alone the skills. So here's the new bridge. Strings are nicely sitting on top with just over half of them showing, which is about right. The width of this is perfectly uniform all the way across. I've done that, I was going to say French dressing, French finishing I think? So these little bits just to make it nice and a little bit of carving around there. The adjusters I've got adjusted, they're about 1mm off their minimum adjustment. New strings obviously. There is no gap at all under here. I've sanded that really nicely. That fits absolutely perfectly. Very pleased with this, very surprised, but hey. The angles here are all correct. That is, don't know if you can see that, that is 90 degrees at this part, call it the back, is at the back, and at front. And you can see the angle there, so that's basically from shaving this down. It just fits, it works brilliantly. The sound post is now, if I can touch it, is now, the edge of it is about there, so it's about there. It's about the thickness, the distance from the bottom of the foot of the bridge to the edge of the sound post is the same as the thickness of this, which is about 9mm I've found, and it's about in line with where the bass bar would be if it was on this side. I actually made a new sound post, fitted it, played around with it, put the old sound post back in, messed about with the old sound post, probably had about 10 iterations, and I just stuck with what felt nice. I was going to move the bridge further in line with these marks, but it's actually ended up where it was originally simply because it sounds better, so I don't know if the bass has just got used to being in that position. I've got a new tail gut on it, new strings, sounds an awful lot different. Getting this shape right was probably the single most difficult thing because all the strings have to be relatively the right height above the fingerboard. I've got this bevel, this straight cut, which not all double basses had, that I had to compensate for. Plus relatively, as I say, the strings had to be the right height, but also the distance between two adjacent strings had to be, the two adjacent strings have to be lower enough so that you can actually bow, and that looks like a simple semicircle, but it's really not. It took me ages to get that right. And obviously I've got the adjusters on it, which look as if they're adjusted all the way down, but they're not. They're adjusted about 1mm up. So as I say, these are just about 1mm up. I've played about with this several times. 1mm at a time makes a massive difference to how it actually feels when you play it. Not so much difference to the sound, but I have heard, and I don't know if this is true, and I can't remember where I heard it, that if you do have an adjustable screw thing on there, it's actually better to adjust it, to screw it out a little bit, rather than having it flush against the foot. Now I don't know why that is, but apparently that does make it sound better. I didn't hear any difference, but and I've done it equal on both sides. That's exactly where I want to be. So I would definitely, I should have started with adjustable feet. It was easier to do with adjustable feet, for fairly obvious reasons, I think. So there we go. Happy with that, and yeah, look at that neat bit of carving there. Who'd have thought it? Proper woodwork. Not really. Right, so that's it really. Thanks for watching. It sounds and plays an awful lot better. I now have got over my fear of woodwork, so I will be doing this. If you do want to see how I actually did it, then keep watching, because I've included what was going to be a part 2, but there was no point in doing a part 2. So either turn off now or watch the next bit. Right, so I'm going to take the bridge off now and move the soundpost. Just a quick check. This should be at right angles. This should be standing actually. Hopefully you can see that. It's very difficult to film. There's a huge great gap there and there. And on the other side, it's not brilliant, but that's pretty much at right angles. So, is the bridge on back to front? Or has it been cut wrong? I really don't know. It's very, very, very difficult to say. I think you can see a lot more clearly the crack, which does go all the way through, and it is flexing, so that can't have been helping. I'm really hoping that I can use the old bridge, but by more luck than judgment I've got all this centred, and again I've put it where the old bridge was rather than the midline. If I put a set square on the back of this just as it's resting, that is actually upright, which is great, because what this means is I can then just hold this gently in place and draw a line with a pencil. I need a shorter pencil. There we are, carpentry. Get moved a bit. I think that's alright. I'll cut well within that in the first place, but as I say, I'm hoping this is the one that's going to be okay. Right, so this is West System 105 epoxy, which is very strong and a fairly brutal thing to use. I'm just going to dribble tiny bits in. I haven't got a huge amount of time to work with this stuff. Kind of wriggling it around as much as I dare to get the most surface. So push the bristles in. Right, there we go. Put that somewhere where I can't play with it. I've marked off, by the way, on this edge where I need to cut the bridge, because obviously I'm switching it round, and the good thing is that where I've clamped it up here, that's actually a bit that's going to be cut off. Of course the action, the string height could be much too low, but don't know. Right, so I've unclamped this, very happy with the way that's turned out. I'm obviously going to sand the excess epoxy, but that is solid. How far that's soaked in, I don't know, but it's pretty good stuff at soaking, and I did poke it down with the brush. So what I've done is I've made a sort of pegboard thing, so I can hold that firmly and sand it off. I mainly made it for the new, inverted commas, new one, because I will need to obviously plane stuff, because this is quite thick there and this one's already been shaped. So if this one works, two things. First of all, it's original. It's a lot lighter actually. I'll weigh them once I've done it. It just feels a lot lighter. So right, I'm just going to sand the excess epoxy off, and then I'm going to cut this line, do a little bit of finessing, and then do the feet. And in theory, that should be it for this one. The new one obviously needs a lot more work. Trouble is, now I've got it, I want to finish it. Even this one might be fine, so this might be complete work. But then at least I suppose I've got a spare, just in case anything disastrous happens. Right, so ideally I'd have one of those band saws on a flat table, because what I need to try and do is to keep this upright as I am sawing it, which needs a level of skill, and I don't have a level of skill. Who knows? Right, so we're back to the original bridge. I've sanded it. I've cut, I don't know if you can see, little notches along the top. I'm relatively happy with that width. That's about the same all the way through. That's the new, because obviously I flipped it around, that's the new E, A, D, G. I've cut little notches in. They're about, as close as I get it, as the crow flies, if a crow would fly across here, 29 millimeters. I've got a selection of needle files. I've got the old strings. I've tried to cut off as little as possible. This where the G string used to be, I don't know if you can see that, that's actually quite deep. So the E string is going to be a little bit deeper in there. But anyway, I'm going to cut these basically so I can then get to the shaping the feet properly. Here's an old trick I literally just made up on the spot. When you go backwards and forwards with something like this, it's possible to get the angles all mixed up, but because I can get my hands on either side of this, you can kind of, a bit like rolling a cigarette, put some sandpaper around it, and just with the drill, which is smaller than the string, just gently roll that in there. Right, the other thing which I've done, which I didn't video, is because the tail gut on the original stuff was not, I didn't feel was quite long enough. I've replaced it with the Vintner Kontrabass 3/4 halb 1/4. So it's the right size. These are not the final strings. And before anybody from a rockabilly band gets excited, because these would look great, wouldn't they? No, they're not bass strings. I've just put them there so that I can get an idea of the string height and also set up and see where the bridge is. That's 90 degrees on that side now rather than the other side, and the angle on the other side looks much more acceptable. Look at that, and get that right the way through there. So this should be a really snug, decent fit all the way round. I'm using 80 grit, which is a little bit rugged, and I'm going to do a combination. Back and forth. Oh! No, that wasn't supposed to happen. Never be without one of these. Right, so all I've done is I've literally put these on there and drawn a line a few millimeters above the height of the old bridge, which I've changed. There you go. I've scored a line on the top of this using that tool thing, because the thickness at the top is supposed to be 4.5 to 4.9. The existing bridge, which I've modified, is actually slightly less than that, about 4.45 or something. This is not the world's best plane. And I'm not the world's best planer. Particularly left-handed. Right, so just quickly strung this up with a new set of Spiracore Weich strings. A set of these strings cost about the same as the standing rigging on a yacht, by the way. They really are ridiculously expensive. And I can already see that this is the original bridge that I switched around and changed. Fits quite nicely. It's actually surprisingly flat on the table, but the action really is too low for me. Not by much. So I'm going to get the other bridge on. Right, this is the one I made from scratch, and yeah, the action is much better than on this, although I've made a bit of a mistake because the A is too low. They're all around 10 millimeters, which sounds super, except for the A, which for some reason is about 7, which doesn't really matter. But if you come down to exactly there, there's a buzz. It's all right everywhere else. So I think what I'm going to need to do, I'm going to finish this one off, and then I'm going to make another one with a slightly different profiling there, but I'm actually going to do an adjustable one. I think that makes sense. I'm quite these things. I mean, that took me a day to knock that out. Sure, it's £27 down the drain, but a decent one of these costs £150, £160. Right, final stages. Just need to give everything a bit of a shine and a polish up. And also, I've noticed on the sort of professional bases, these little pointy bits, they kind of shape them and do little grooves. So I'm going to do that just for the sake of it. So what I do need to do is this height here, which is probably a little bit big, needs to be the same here. So I'm going to sand this down, and luckily I've got something that's just about the right radius for that, so that this isn't a great big sort of step here. Does that make sense? So it's going to be the same height as that. So there you go. I think you can see the difference between this one, which is big and bulky, and this one, which is much more similar to the size of the other side. And that was really simple. That literally just took me a few minutes of wrapping a bit of sandpaper around that pipe, sanding it down. So I'm beginning to enjoy this woodworking stuff. It's I don't know why I had fear of it before. It's actually relatively simple, famous last words. Right, so here's a scary bit. I am going to remove the sound posts. Most double bass players seem to live in fear of the sound post falling down and them having to re-put it up. But a bit like with a boat, there's a difference between dismasting and demasting. One is an accident. You don't want your boat to be dismasted, but if you demast it, which I've done with Serenity to take it off, that's a different thing. I've marked here a line, which I don't know if you can see through here, is if the sound post were, sorry, if the bass bar were on this side, that's where it would be. And the sound post, I have got a new one, should be up against that line, and it should be distance from the bridge to that side of the sound post. That distance should be the same as the thickness of the wood at that point as a starting point. So you can see it's too far in that direction. It's probably a little bit too far this way. I did knock it a little bit in this direction, and I'm also thinking when I put the bridge back, I'm going to line it up with the cuts rather than where it was before, because who knows, it was probably put in the wrong place before. It should be, the centre of the bridge should be there. So very happy with the bridge, very happy with the way that it sounds and it plays, and I could get away with it, but my main concern is it's so tight that it feels to me like the sound post is really pushing up against the bass. Maybe I shouldn't do this, but I'm going to. Right, so I don't know if this is going to work. What I'm going to do, switch this on, is tape my fake GoPro thing so hopefully you can see the sound post there. It's very difficult to get this, but that sound post is definitely leaning from the bottom to the top, from left to right, and I'm going to deliberately knock the sound post down. I've seen this on a YouTube video. This is fairly solid. This is the proper This is the proper Stentor one. I've also got a cheapskate bendy metal one, but this is quite solid. So I'm gonna, and I've put some tape over here to protect the base. So I'm gonna give this a few bashes. There we are, point of no return. How scary is that? Now, you need one of these, something similar. This is where that misspent youth in a penny arcade really paid off. Oh, it's interesting, it doesn't go up that bit. It has to come through. Learning curve. It has to come through this hole here on the F-hole. Right. Already I can see there's quite a curve on the top bit. This is probably slightly too long. I'm going to let this kind of rest. I've got plenty to play around with, by the way. This is the new one, not twice as long, but it's pretty long. Don't know. Anyway, I'm going to let this kind of rest for a while. That wasn't as tight as I thought it was. Maybe this isn't the big problem that I'm thinking that it is. So I shall cut a new one out of the new piece and fit it, and then take it from there. Right. So this is quite literally unbelievable. I've just done a very quick fitting, shaping the top to what I thought it might look like, and the right length. And that's nice and upright. It fits at the bottom, and there's about, I don't know if you can see it, there's sort of 0.5 millimetre or whatever gap where I just need to chamfer it down a little bit, and it's also nice and upright. So I didn't film it simply because I thought it was going to take me ages to stand this up and put it in, and it just fell in place. I'll tell you what, this double bass stuff, this soundpost stuff is easy compared with doing boat stuff. Easy peasy. It's actually, everything in a boat is awkward, so you kind of get used to these things. So anyway, I'm just going to take that out, shave the top, and then have a look at it. This is, I don't know why I was, with a violin I guess it might be difficult because it's much smaller. You can see, hopefully you can see the little gap at the top where I need to get this sort. Right, because I didn't film it last time, it's basically like doing a fondue. You stick your stick on there, the grain needs to be going that way. These do fit through here, by the way. I didn't think the other one did, but I was just being awkward taking it out, so I didn't need to take it out through that bit. Simply put it in, take it over to the bit that's a bit higher, get the foot to roughly where you think it should be, and you can line up on the marks that you've got. And I could probably just pull this out and it would be fine, but I'm just going to, ouch, I just stabbed myself with it. These things are sharp, by the way. I just stabbed myself. We got blood? Yeah, look, we got blood. Look at that. I suffer from my art. Just give it a little tap in place, and then we can go and get a plaster and carry on with this. Ow! See, that was simple. That was real time. That was literally as long as it took me the last time as well. Except I didn't stab myself last time. So as soon as the camera's turned on. So I don't know if you can see this, but I have carved a bit of an angle and a bit of a curve on this. And normally I think luthiers sign their work, but this is signed with blood, so that is a drop of my blood. I'm not going to film me putting it back in because I'll probably cut my thumb off or something. So I'm just going to gradually adjust this a little bit, and you can see quite clearly what needs to be cutting off until this is an exact fit at the top. The nice thing about having a flat back base, obviously, is that this is already nice and square on the bottom. Look, you can see the little dings where I've been hitting it. Finesse. I'm not. This is very basic woodwork. Right, I was a bit traumatised by my injury there, so I didn't finish that off particularly well. This is the soundpost that I made. I actually then took the old soundpost, modified it slightly based on this, using this as a pattern, and then put the old one back in, partly because it was original. It's older wood. This is 12 years old. Given that the base itself is about 45 years old, it was better. But basically I'd left it at the point where I put this in, and it was kind of leaning a little bit with that bit on the underneath on the table of the base. And then what I found to be effective is to simply put this through the F-hole and pull it to the upright position. I've seen people sort of knocking them about and stuff, and I didn't do that. I did try that initially before I actually adjusted it, and then you could see whether or not it fitted, because part of the reason is that when you straighten this up, it pushes the table up, and I was slightly concerned that the table was pushed up by about 5 millimeters originally, because this was put in all skew width and bad, and everything I've read says that these shouldn't be too tight. So I've got it now, so it pushes the table up about 2 millimeters, if that, and basically this is held in place by the string tension down on it. Does that make sense? So incredibly easy job. I was very fearful of this. I thought, you know what, once I've knocked this down, if I can't put the thing back in, that's it. No bass playing until the luthier, until I can get a luthier. Anyway, so that's it on the soundpost. I mean, I played around with this. I think I put it in about 10 different times or something, and it makes a slightly different sound where it is. So there's a real skill in setting this up. But I basically got it set up based on those principles that I talked about right at the beginning. Right, so having done all this work to it, lovely bridge sorted out, I need to learn how to play it. So back to the Discover double bass courses, and having done all that, I'm probably still going to go to a luthier. This fingerboard is not perfect. I can see as I look down it, it kind of wavers like that. I should probably get a luthier to do it, put a much nicer bridge on, but for the time being it'll get me up and sorted, and hopefully if I find a teacher we can kind of go through what I'm looking for. And obviously I've got a sound in my head that I would like this to sound like, and I would like me to sound like. And basically the sound that got me drawn to the double bass in the first place, if you listen to John Martin's Solid Air track, the track on the LP with Danny Thompson? Yeah, Danny Thompson playing bass, he kind of gets a bit of a growl from his bass, and also a nice sort of thuddy sound. There's a real combination. That's what I'm aiming for, but I'm certainly not at that level yet. So I'm pleased with this. This got me to the stage where I can play it, I can learn it, and on to the next tune in the Discover double bass book video course. 2, 3, 4. If you managed to make it this part of the video, you've probably just woken up after a long sleep. But thanks for watching if you did. Any comments? This is not how to do it, this is just how I did it. I'm sure I've made loads of mistakes. If you do know about this stuff, do write comments below. Write comments below anyway, and see you next time for some varnishing and galley work.